A woman named Julia Banks is attempting to persuade the police that she has been framed. Detective Pope questions why Julia has re-established contact with her abusive ex-boyfriend, as evidenced by incriminating photos and Facebook messages. Julia denies having any communication with Michael Vargas, but the detective finds her arguments unconvincing. The situation escalates when Michael's body is discovered in Julia's house, making her the primary suspect. The story then shifts back 6 months when Julia, the chief editor of a popular online magazine, receives a toast from her colleagues. Julia desires to live for herself while working remotely, but she is uncertain if she has made the right choice. After bidding farewell to her colleagues, Julia moves in with her boyfriend David Canover, whom she plans to marry soon. Meanwhile, David's ex-wife Tessa prepares to bring their daughter Lily to spend the weekend with her father. Tessa appears friendly towards Julia, and Lily is delighted to see her father. Tessa departs, and Julia makes an effort to build a bond with her fiancé's daughter from his previous marriage. During the night, Lily has trouble sleeping and seeks comfort from Julia. Tessa also struggles to sleep. In the morning, David leaves for work, and Julia's mind is preoccupied with thoughts of her ex-boyfriend, who insulted her during a phone call. David informs Julia that he will be late, but she doesn't mind having dinner with Lily in his absence. While the girl plays, Julia prepares dinner. Suddenly, the doorbell rings, and it is Tessa, who wants to ensure everything is in order. Lily requested her mother to join them for dinner, causing Julia to feel embarrassed but not object. However, Tessa began behaving as if she were the dominant figure in the house. Moreover, she stayed to tuck Lily into bed, which naturally didn't sit well with Julia. Tessa acknowledged that it was difficult for her to accept the breakup of their family before bidding Julie a good night and leaving. During the night, Julia woke up to strange noises and became anxious as David hadn't returned home. At one point, she saw Michael outside the window and screamed, but it was just her imagination. It turned out to be David. Julia informed her boyfriend about the day's events, and David mentioned that Tessa needed time to adjust to the new situation. Julia began to settle into David's house and familiarized herself with Lily's schedule to stay updated on everything. Later, Julia contacted her friend Lee and expressed her concerns about David's ex-wife, but Lee advised her not to make a big issue out of it. While passing a store window, Julia instantly fell in love with a beautiful dress, but her mood was dampened when the saleswoman mentioned that Tessa was a frequent. In their small town, everyone seemed to know each other. Julia eventually shared with David that they should inform Tessa and Lily about their plans to get married. Together, David and Julia attended a children's event where Tessa was also present. After the performance, Tessa watched as Lily left with David and his new girlfriend, clearly enjoying herself. Tessa became consumed by jealousy, thinking that Julia aimed to replace her. Despite her passion for horseback riding, even sports couldn't alleviate Tessa's anger. Later in the evening, Julia attended a party celebrating David's successful contract for his thriving new brewery, which had been finalized some time ago. He abandoned his banking career to pursue his dream. Tessa, who was present, wore the same dress that Julia wanted to buy. Taking the stage, Tessa delivered a speech expressing her unwavering support for David and his ambition. Most of the guests were unaware of Tessa's identity. Julia's mood soured, but she agreed to dance with David when he offered. Tessa couldn't help but keep her eyes on them, unable to bear the thought of her ex-husband finding happiness with another woman. Suddenly, Tessa noticed that Julia had left her phone behind. Later, Julia realized her phone was missing, unaware that Tessa had already found her date of birth online and successfully guessed her password. Tessa browsed through all the photos on Julia's phone and discovered a copy of a restraining order against Michael Vargas, which piqued her interest. The next day, Tessa visited her husband's workplace and inquired if he was certain about Julia. David responded that he didn't require her advice or permission. When David revealed that he and Julia were getting married soon, Tessa believed it was a mistake, as she felt Julia lacked knowledge about raising children. The ex-wife reminisced about their past life, and David subtly suggested that she should leave. After work, he returned Julia's phone, which he found under the car seat. Julia received a call from an unknown number, but there was only silence on the other end. Tessa treated her daughter harshly, resembling a true tyrant. In the afternoon, Helen, Tessa's critical mother, visited them and expressed disapproval of her daughter and everything she did. Tessa disliked it when her mother praised David's bride while criticizing her daughter's appearance. Tessa is currently going through a tough time and desires to find a job, despite having an education. However, Helen believes that Tessa will fail, citing her inability to keep her family together as evidence. Later, while Tessa was looking at wedding photos, she cried. In the evening, the couple was visited by their friends, Sarah and David's friend. Sarah told Julia that Tessa used to be an angry and jealous woman many years ago. David had wanted to leave Tessa, but he had to change his plans because Tessa became pregnant. Throughout the evening, Julia received calls from an unknown number. Meanwhile, Tessa created a fake Facebook page in Julia's name. The next day, as Julia was preparing to take a bath, someone broke into the house and stole her belongings, including the engagement ring and David's watch. Just then, the doorbell rang and Julia found a bouquet of flowers on the doorstep. At that moment, Tessa arrived and claimed to have seen a man leaving their yard. Julia, suppressing her displeasure, asked Tessa not to come over without an invitation. However, Tessa insisted that as long as her daughter was there, they would have to tolerate her presence. Julia tried to find out who sent the bouquet, but the flower delivery service informed her that the order was anonymous. Julia became friends with Lily and they had a great time together. However, Julia continued to be haunted by nightmares and was convinced that Michael was somewhere nearby. She called Ollie at night and expressed her belief that the calls and flowers were meant for Michael. Ollie advised her to finally tell the truth to her fiancé. Meanwhile, Tessa, pretending to be Julia on Facebook, messaged Michael Vargas and quickly received a response. They started corresponding, and Michael texted that he missed her. Tessa sent him a provocative photo of Julia, all the while unable to find her own ring anywhere. Later, Julia bumped into Tessa on the street, and this time Tessa was very friendly. They apologized to each other for their previous conversation, and Tessa suggested having lunch together. Julia happily agreed. Tessa informed Julia that her marriage with David fell apart due to Tessa's infidelity, which led David to devote all his time to work, leaving Tessa feeling extremely lonely. Julia empathizes with Tessa, but unlike David's ex-wife, Julia has a job. Their conversation appeared to be pleasant until Tessa began sharing explicit details about her relationship with David. This confused Julia because David behaved differently with her. Tessa then asked Julia to show her the ring that belonged to David's grandmother. However, Julia lied, claiming it was being cleaned that evening. While Julia was distracted by a call from an unknown number, she lost sight of Lily in a panic. She sought David's help and informed him about Lily's disappearance. David hurriedly informed the guards. During this time, Julia thought she saw Michael again, which made her feel unwell, but she continued searching for Lily. Unbeknownst to her, Tessa had already found their daughter and blamed Julia for the situation. Tessa also claimed to have seen someone known to Julia approaching Lily. David demanded an explanation from Julia and questioned the whereabouts of her ring. Julia confessed that it had gone missing but had no knowledge of the person Tessa mentioned. David became upset because Tessa feared leaving Lily with them, worried that his ex-wife would prevent him from seeing their daughter. Julia spent a sleepless night. Tessa attempted to teach Lily how to ride a horse, disappointing Helen, Lily's grandmother, who felt frustrated that her granddaughter was afraid. Despite the girl's fear, Tessa insisted she stay on the horse and forbade her from dismounting. Julia confidently defied Tessa's prohibition and decided to join them despite Tessa's disapproval. Since it was David's turn to spend time with their daughter in the car, Julia took Lily with her. Julia took the opportunity to share with Lily her own experience of being mistreated by a loved one, referring to her father. When Julia asked Lily about the man she had been talking to at the fair, Lily didn't understand the question. Later in the evening, David couldn't find the watch that Julia had given him. Subsequently, they had a dinner event with David's main investors. Throughout the evening, Julia couldn't stop thinking about Tessa, who had claimed to have a passionate relationship with David. Determined to take action, Julia decided to take her fiancé to the restroom. Meanwhile, Tessa continued to exchange messages with Michael, posing as Julia. The following day, Tessa demanded an apology from Lily for disobedience and went as far as cutting her hair, claiming that Julia had neglected it. In the midst of Julia's panic upon receiving an email from Michael expressing his longing for her, the doorbell rang. Tessa arrived with Lily, who was in tears, revealing that Tessa had punished her by cutting her hair. Shocked and angered, Julia tried to remove David's ex-wife from the situation. Upon hearing David's voice, Tessa started screaming, pretending that Julia had intentionally attacked her. In the chaos, Tessa accidentally fell down the stairs, adding credibility to her fabricated story. Initially, David believed Tessa's version of events and took his ex-wife and daughter away, leaving Julia devastated as she realized that Tessa would stop at nothing to ruin her life. In the evening, Tessa felt satisfied with herself after covering up a scratch with foundation. Julia finally confided in David, revealing the truth about what had really happened. David, now unsure of what to believe, grew tired of the constant arguments and promised to talk to his ex-wife, hoping she would finally leave them alone. Ollie obtained a ticket for the upcoming flight and traveled to support her friend. With the help of her hacker friend, they managed to uncover some information about Tessa. It was revealed that Tessa had been arrested at the age of 16 for setting fire to her father's house, as he had abandoned her mother for another woman. Fortunately, no one was harmed in the incident. However, Tessa continued to exhibit obsessive and aggressive behavior. Upon learning these details, Ollie changed her opinion about her friend's engagement and advised her to return home. However, Julia was determined and refused to give up. She wanted David, her fiancé, to know the truth. When Ollie departed, Julia heard the front door open and assumed it was David returning. To her surprise, it was Michael instead. Julia attempted to call her fiancé, but Michael struck her, claiming that she had invited him over. It quickly dawned on Julia that Tessa was involved in this situation. She managed to injure Michael and escape. Unbeknownst to Julia, Tessa had been observing the house the entire time. Once Julia left, Tessa entered the house and confronted Michael, blaming him for failing his task. Although Michael had never met her before, he realized she was the mastermind behind the setup. Tessa ended Michael's life. Julia reported her version of events to the police, firmly believing that Tessa had manipulated her by creating a fake Facebook profile and communicating with Michael. However, the detective found her account implausible. Meanwhile, Tessa tidied herself up at home, fully aware of what had transpired. As soon as David learned about the situation, he rushed to the police station. Julia apologized to him for not revealing the truth about Michael earlier, as she didn't want her beloved to perceive her as weak. David reassured the bride-to-be that everything would be alright. Detective Pope summoned David for questioning and presented him with printed copies of Julia and Michael's messages, indicating that Julia intended to sell her engagement ring and David's watch. David couldn't comprehend why she would need to do such a thing. Acting on the detective's advice, he prepared to return home to his daughter. Upon discovering that her fiancé had left, Julia was devastated. Meanwhile, Tessa destroyed any remaining evidence. The doorbell rang, and it was David who had arrived to see Lily. Julia had been released on her own recognizance during the investigation, but her phone had been taken as evidence. She attempted to call David from a landline, but he had left his smartphone in the car. Meanwhile, when David noticed Julia's ring on Tessa's finger, he realized who was truly responsible for everything. In that moment, Julia hurried to her beloved, fearing for his safety. Tessa blamed Julia for the entire situation, as Julia had wanted to take her place. Recognizing that his ex-wife had lost her sanity, David decided to take their daughter away from there. However, Tessa knocked him unconscious, assuring the unconscious David that she would take care of him. Tessa briefly left the room, during which time Julia sneaked into the house. After confirming that David was alive, she went to find Lily and took her to the car. Tessa tended to David's injuries and then tied him up, unaware that Julia was observing their actions. Frightened, Julia wanted to call 911, but Tessa noticed her and attacked, knocking her down. Tessa insulted Julia, calling her worthless and useless, which only fueled Julia's determination to fight back. A physical altercation ensued between the two women, and ultimately Julia managed to knock Tessa unconscious. She then rushed to David's aid, but just as she did, Tessa regained consciousness and attacked her rival once again. Julia pleaded with Tessa to stop before it was too late. In a moment of realization, Tessa caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror and decided to stop voluntarily. She passed away before Julia's eyes. Before taking her last breath, Tessa asked Julia to take care of Lily, leaving Julia in tears. Julia started calling out for David. When he regained his senses, he apologized to her for not believing her. The police and ambulance arrived, and Detective Pope realized that Julia was telling the truth. Lily, the father's bride, hugged Julia. 6 months passed, and David, Lily, and Julia lived happily as a family. Recently, David and Lily got married. Ollie frequently visits them, and everything was going well until Helen knocked on the door. She came to see her granddaughter. Make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on more exciting new movies.